Good morning. It's August 13th today, and we're in First Corinthians chapter 8. This is Paul's chapter on food sacrificed to idols, which, again, I find very helpful. I'm glad that it's included here in First Corinthians. It's really a good principle to know that we should be careful about offending those around us who have particular convictions about things that are sin to them, but maybe not to others. And so I think there's a really good thing that we have some instruction here. Unfortunately, we don't have any clear parallel to food sacrifice to idols. We don't, at least in most parts of the world, deal with that exact application of this principle. So it does take some discernment on our part to navigate through that in our own society and culture. What exactly would it be that would be something parallel to food sacrifice to idols in our lifetime? And it brings to my mind during the time of COVID, there was a lot of things were going on just besides COVID. There were societal issues as well, having to do with maybe racism and discrimination and the reactions against that, and authority in terms of the police and how they were treated in society at that time too. And there were a lot of people who had very strong opinions on each side, and the church certainly got involved in that, whether they liked it or not, and whether they should have or not. And it's because there were people who were expecting things to be said and others expecting things not to be said, and you almost couldn't do anything walking in the middle of that, because if you didn't say the right things, then there was something wrong. But if you said something else, that could be wrong too. So very difficult to navigate through that, and it caused a lot of people to leave different churches, find other places, or leave the church in general. A lot of hard feelings came out of that, and so throughout that time, we were thinking about even applying passages like this in our own walk with the Lord and with each other. And certainly, there are two things I think that are the core of this. First of all, love is at the core of it. That you want to show love and deference to others by, as much as possible, not being offensive where it doesn't, when there doesn't need to be offense. But the other side of that is discernment too. And I think there's a principle on both sides of that. One of those is that we don't look to be offended. In other words, we don't go through life looking for opportunities to be outraged and offended by others, particularly by other believers. I had a friend a number of years ago. It was during an Olympic time, and there was an announcer on television who had made a mistake and had offended a lot of people with it. However, a lot of the people didn't realize when they saw it that they were actually offended by what he said on the spot. In fact, because of reaction on Facebook, a number of days later, even weeks later, people were saying, "Oh, yeah, I should have been offended by that when it happened in real time." Well, if you weren't offended by it in real time, then why would you think to be offended by it later, only later on? Are you looking to be offended? Are you looking to have something make you angry or sad or whatever it might be? And that's, I think, a wrong stance for Christians too. We ought not to be looking to be offended by others. We ought not to be so self-conscious on those things. Now, of course, we can always look back and say, "Oh yeah, God would have been offended by that, therefore I should have been offended by that," and that's a different deal. But when it comes to our personal preferences and even the way we might hear things, especially when they weren't intended that way, we need to be careful not to be offended too quickly as well on that side. But the principle here is the opposite of that. We ought to look to not be offensive to other brothers and sisters, to not cause them to stumble. And that takes a great deal of love, and it takes a stepping outside of yourself and even seeing the world from different points of view sometimes. Um, yeah, and that's a lot of work for us as Christians, but it's something that needs to be done that God calls us to here. So that's it for today.